You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions. This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/intotheportal.
Hello, and welcome back into the portal. I'm Amber A.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And we're back with a brand new Film Friday.
Finally back, talking
More
about
like
movies.
Story Saturday? Or Sci-Fi Saturday?
Sci-Fi Saturday, that
there you
works.
go.
That's perfect. That's awesome. Yeah, no, we're stoked to be back. This was one, it's kind of been on the list for a little while, I guess. It's a Criterion classic. But before we jump right into it, though, as usual, tiny bit of housekeeping. The really only thing we wanted to mention to you guys off the top of the show, we're a little bit behind this week, as usual, on Into the Portal. So no regular feed episode this week.
Sorry, guys.
Sorry about that, guys.
It's kind of my bad, to be honest. I was pretty preoccupied with...
Special event.
Yeah, it was a special event at work, and it was just the first we've done in a really long time. So
definitely.
My brain was just kind of out in the ether of that.
Indeed.
So anyways, yeah, we really want to make sure this is a really good one for you.
Definitely.
All of you. So we're just going to take an extra week just to put it together.
For sure. And it's going to be, I guess we can give a little teaser at the end of the episode maybe. So, but we just wanted to let you guys know that. And that was pretty much it. So let's jump right into this.
Yeah.
Today we're talking about 1958 sci-fi classic, at least it's a classic now, Fiend Without A Face. Fiend Without A Face. That's how I like to pronounce it anyway. Mad science spawns evil fiends is kind of the tagline with the title there. So like I said off the top, Criterion Collection film. We actually purchased this mad discounted from an actual physical brick and mortar movie store here in Kelowna that is sadly going out of business, unfortunately. So like shout out to Leo's Video, because we've been patrons of them for a long time, and that was really awesome to get a collection of sweet movies that we've been renting from them for years, and now we get to own them. Yeah. Directed by Arthur Crabtree. Amber added a little LOL Crabtree here because obviously we're massive Murdoch Mysteries fans.
Anyone who's ever watched any amount of Murdoch will know Crabtree, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
And he has so many roles and episodes where he's basically spouting off these ridiculous theories about aliens or underground creatures or whoever,
living mummies, like Egyptian mummies,
yeah, the living
whatever
mummies,
it may be, hauntings,
the curse of the mummy.
Yeah.
So this is definitely up his alley. So kudos to Crabtree, the real Crabtree, Arthur Crabtree.
Right. Okay, well, let's do what we usually do. And obviously, we hope all of you have watched this movie. Find a way to watch it. It's awesome.
It's really, really good. And it's just so classic. It honestly kind of reminds me of a earlier version of The Thing to a certain extent, except this does not have extraterrestrial origins.
Right.
It has very terrestrial origins, very
strangely
human origins, these fiends. But to kick things off here, this is interesting because we are actually this film, the setting is Winthrop, Manitoba, Canada, which is kind of cool.
Canadian connection, indeed.
Canadian, yeah, totally. And this was very typical of the Cold War era, which is what we're dealing with in this film.
Right.
And essentially, we get started off with a soldier. He's standing guard. You see the sign behind him as he's smoking his little cigarette. U.S. Air Force Experimental Base Number 6, Winthrop, Manitoba.
Right.
So that's pretty cool. And then it gets going right away, which you love, and I always love too. And we get some action, and there's a man. He's kind of in the forest, and then he becomes the first victim of the Fiend Without A Face, which is just really weird. You don't even see anything. You hear a shriek or a cry. The soldier comes running through the bushes, and then he finds this victim.
It's funny too because the first thing you think when you see this initial scene is this is going to be such a cheesy movie, basically, right? And it totally was considered a B movie, a B sci-fi.
Yeah.
But
I can see that.
As you hold on and just kind of wait a sec, because it's obviously classic. Us sitting here now in 2019, looking back in 1958, but it's cheesy in the best ways Because you can't see the monsters, right? We don't see them.
Exactly. It's so bad it's good.
Right.
Well, you do see them eventually.
Eventually we do.
Exactly. But it does start off very mysterious. You just hear like the rustlings of things, like these weird like creature-y sounds, these gurgling kind of weirdness. Like,
Yeah.
But then, it's kind of this weird thing, right? Where you get a death and then it switches over to the military side, right? So we're getting Major Cummings. He is the lead star of this film. And he is investigating this death because he and the military have both deemed it unfit for local investigators. And this kind of, again, illuminates this dichotomy or this this binary, or just like the struggle, not the struggle, but just the butting of heads between the military, so the Americans, and then the locals, which are Canadians, and the distrust between the two, right? It's very mutual to a certain extent.
And they keep saying, though, it's like, oh, we're, because this is a mutual, it's like a joint military base, obviously, like you said, for Cold War protection against some sort of
Russians.
attack, right?
Yeah, from the north.
But, of course, the locals don't trust anything that's going on because there's a very, very, very heavy-handed message, I guess you would say, or just like theme of radioactive fallout and atomic energy, essentially, which was obviously a massive topic of discussion.
Oh, yeah, and a lot of people distrusted it, and they distrusted the people that were using it. And so, exactly, that's a huge theme of this film here. And it gets even better. So this is interesting because Cummings, he is the one that is going about his investigation, and he goes to visit this guy. He becomes suspicious of a professor, right? We get the classic professor role in this film, Dr. R.E. Walgate. And essentially he goes to see him, but before he can, there's this weird sort of like development where the body has been like taken by the locals.
Yeah.
So again, that plays into this theme that we've already mentioned before. And so this kind of negates their conclusions, right? Because they don't know how this person died. They don't know why, what's going on. Is it trying to be covered up by the locals? Because it's the local coroner and the mayor that kind of halt this, and they claim the body before an autopsy can be performed.
Which is so strange and suspicious, obviously.
It kind of is,
It's the same theme that we've seen how many times in countless X-Files episodes or, many things. Murdoch Mysteries episodes, actually. Just think going back to that reference.
Definitely,
right? Where it's like,
And the main goal of Cummings is obviously to dissuade the public opinion from thinking that has anything to do with radiation or anything to do with the military. And he even says outright, like, local investigators are going to blame radiation and the military for this death. So they're kind of, from the get-go, they're out to prove that they don't have involvement, and they're down to get to the bottom of this because it's kind of weird, right?
Yeah.
We don't even know how weird it really is yet. The victim's sister, she's kind of an interesting character too, right? This Barbara Gazelle. So she kind of becomes a figure that is very central in the plot here because of her role with the professor as his assistant, and also because her brother was the first victim.
Yes. And the whole time we were watching this, you and I were both saying, like, wow, she reminds us a lot of Audrey Hepburn.
Very much so. Yeah, I actually looked into her like background a little bit. She doesn't do too much. She had a few mostly like B movies, sci-fi, like something to do with space women, or I can't remember.
We'll have to check out a few more.
Yeah, but she's very, very pretty. She's very nice to look at. The actual poster is so funny because like on the poster it's just her towel clad.
Yes.
Which is a very entertaining scene, to say the least.
Yeah, it's
the
great.
Major is so funny. He just he doesn't barge in, but he's kind of just like, a little presumptuous, and just enters her home.
The door is open.
It
not
is
like
open.
Unlocked, like literally ajar.
I guess. Why? I wonder.
Well,
that's kind of...
It's kind of odd.
It's the open door. It's a symbol, hey? Because she is the most open, and she trusts him most, like, instantly, basically, hey?
Actually, I suppose that is, I didn't really think of that. If you want to dig into some symbolism and stuff like that,
well,
that does
it
make
works.
sense. She does trust him, but she doesn't want to show it around that first local that then as the Major's talking to her in that scene when he walks in on her towel clad, and then the guy who ends up trying to rally the locals, and they at a later point in the movie think that it's some sort of like, totally disgruntled, like gone crazy GI that's like going rampant and killing people is the theory of some of the locals. So they gather up this like pitchfork and torch kind of party to go into the woods, which doesn't exactly paint a very pretty picture of the locals in Winthrop, Manitoba in 1958 per se. Yeah. But where was I going with that exactly? Oh, yeah, the confrontation. He comes in and she kind of tightens up. She's really loose with Major Cummings when he first comes into the house. And then she's like, you better leave, like, like get the hell out of here. Because she doesn't really want to seem like she's sympathetic.
Even though she does start to refer to him by the first name pretty fast too, right? She's getting comfortable. There was one scene though before he even goes to her house, right? And they have her in the office at the military base, and they're kind of going over. They find something right on the victim or around the victim. It's a notebook, and it's kind of taking note of all the takeoffs and landings of the military base, and they kind of describe it to her, and then as she's kind of realizing what it is, she basically plays it off as like, oh no, he's actually talking about the cows. Right. It's like some sort of weird, like, I wouldn't call it like code, but it's kind of a strange, and that's her interpretation initially.
Well, she clearly interpreted it as like a log of him like keeping track of the emotions of the cows and how they were affected by the planes. How they were affected, radioactive testing or whatever else was going on in the space.
But that notebook does come into play again, right? Because it actually has more to do with the professor's experiments initially. Right. And she's just an interesting bird overall. So she's kind of in the know, kind of not in the know. She doesn't even realize her professor has a laboratory in his house, which is kind of funny. How would you not know that? Like, you're there. He's a professor.
Maybe it was one of those situations where you kind of like don't really want to know, so you choose not to know.
True. Or you're only told so much, and you're an employee, ergo you kind of respect those boundaries kind of thing. I could see that definitely, because this professor is quite the character too. Should we talk about him?
Sure. Let's talk about the professor a little bit. Okay. He kind of reminds me, he doesn't have like the evil professor kind of thing behind him like some of the others, I guess. Like, I don't know why, but
he's not nefarious. He's just kind of not a bumbling fool either, though. He's kind of just, he's very determined with his psychic experiments and all this stuff.
Exactly. Like, just for, like, I don't even know why I thought of this, but just the Reanimator popped into my head a few minutes ago when we were kind of going back and forth here. And it's like, not like that guy.
No.
But yeah, sort of a similar kind of film in different eras, I suppose you might say.
Mm-hmm. Kind of just the classic professor trope where he digs himself a hole that's way too big for his capabilities and understanding. Very classic humanist scientist to a certain degree, a little bit. Hey?
How can you not? I mean, the possibility of falling into situations like that when you're performing experiments. I mean, that's just it. It's an experiment. You don't know what the result is going to be.
Exactly. He's just going into it blind, and his situation is obviously perfect, right? Because he's situated right beside this military base. And I think he had some sort of relationship with the military too, if I'm not mistaken, before he retired.
Well, it was funny, like I think that's right. And then during his monologue, whatever you want to call it, during one of the main scenes where he's explaining this, he just openly admits to like stealing power, like just so flagrantly, like, I've been stealing copious amounts of power for like a very long time. And it's just like so casual about it, basically.
It's very intriguing, his whole, before we get into that though, there was a scene that kind of foreshadows where we're leading to with this, where this is like right after Grizel or Barbara is interviewed by the military at the base, and they have a breakthrough right after that, and you see a scene with Major Cummings, and he's getting a report from his like engineers and all this stuff about how they've had a breakthrough in the radar detection over the Arctic Circle, and the way they phrase is like they're peering right into the Russians' backyard, which is pivotal, right? During the Cold War era, like this is something that was integral to national security. Mm-hmm. And beyond, Canadian and American.
It's funny. It's like the battle for the Arctic is still ongoing.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like every day.
Except this time, like in this era, obviously they're watching for missiles. Yeah, they're watching for like planes.
Hostile act,
yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, but it's interesting because you get the scene where the radar is getting to a point where it's growing and growing, but then it suddenly stops, even though they're increasing the power of their generators. Already over capacity, as the engineer tells him. But Major Cummings, this is a funny little quote from the scene from the movie. He says, "Major Cummings, we want you to give us everything you've got." Peterson, engineer. But Jeff, we've already exceeded the design limits. Every time you take a test, you ask for more power. If I take any more of those rods out, the reactor's liable to get out of control. Major Cummings. Well, take some more out. We'll have to risk it. We've got to have more power. So what is that? Like, it's just very obviously like the symbolism, right, of this increasing, like, you know, like infinite amounts of power and how that plays into the ultimate plot, I guess. But we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, right?
Not really. I think you're doing a good job. We're going in chronological order here. Yeah,
I guess so, hey, because we're at the point now where, we're getting this weird mystery of the disappearing power. We're also seeing, we see the funeral, right? That's another thing too, of Jack Grizzell. Meanwhile, these planes are roaring overhead, which is kind of like, you know, the constant disruption of military life, or in life, you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
And right after that is where we get more victims. So this to me was kind of interesting, right? Because it's just a farmer and his wife, and they're going about their daily chores. She's going to feed the chickens before she comes back in.
Right.
You don't see much. You just see them kind of like grab their necks or whatever and fall to the ground. And
okay. So the wife, she gets strangled going into the feed the chickens, and then he comes
seemingly strangled.
Right. And he's just like, she's classic name. It's like Mabel or something like that. And
Margie.
Something like that. And then he tries stabbing at whatever this thing is that he can't see underneath the straw. And it's like, yeah, I mean, at this point, we're still super entertained despite not seeing what these things are, because you want to know what it is, because clearly it's something wrapping around. And like, that's why it's almost like you're thinking to yourself, this is something out of like Alien.
Yeah.
It seems extraterrestrial because I think of like the face grabbing scene from like the Alien movies, right?
Yeah.
With like the tail kind of wraps around the neck, like it's on your face. And that's sort of like what these things end up being a little bit.
Face suckers.
But the fiends, do you want to get into that a little bit?
The fiends. Yeah, because I was initially, when we've seen this movie a few times now, and that scene with the farmer's wife, and they kind of fall in. I wrote it down. I was like, what's the motive of these fiends? Like, why are they just strangling people? But then it gets into more than just that, right? Because then we get the results of the autopsies.
Right. So the autopsies start coming in, and we end up with some classic quotes, and one from Major Cummings where it's as if it's some mental vampire were at work, is this line. And then the doctor performing the autopsy ends up agreeing with his statement, because essentially the brain and spinal cord were missing.
That's weird, man.
And
where'd it go?
Consumed, presumably, right?
I guess.
But this is the thing we're going to get into when we break down the monsters, the fiends, if you will, because there's a lot at work here when it comes to Into the Portal and the paranormal in this movie, right? We thought going into it the first time we watched it, extraterrestrial of some kind, right? Like this professor has some sort of ties to something weird in the government or whatever. But yeah, basically we're dealing with manifesting something physical from the energy of human thought, and then that thing needing to sustain itself in the same way like a literal cryptozoological monster phenomena might need to, by consuming and or utilizing in some way the energy of the human brain, and then maybe the spinal cord is just a byproduct of its attack.
Well, but it's all part of the central nervous system, and these things literally represent physically the central nervous system, right?
They do.
So it's like
it's like a central nervous system
to
chupacabra.
Create right?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Let's go with that.
You know, it's
Say
like
it again.
like eats like in order to stay like. That's
okay,
that's
okay.
not. That's
okay.
not.
No,
you know what I'm trying to say, though.
It consumes its likeness because it's basically that.
Exactly. It's the life
just
force.
A nervous system, but then but it's so nefarious. It's a monster, right? It's like it behaves as if a creature with arms and legs and claws and a mouth and
that's very true.
And all
and
these
that's
things.
kind of something that I put in the discussion section is like the actual. What can we actually define these things as? Are they these fiends? Are they nefarious? Are they simple organisms that need to survive much like any other organism? But how the hell were these things created? Let's get into that, because the professor has a very interesting tale, and you've already kind of illuminated part of it, but I thought this was really fun. And so he is a psychologist. He's studying psychic phenomena and the effects of the brain, and he actually has this manuscript called The Principles of Thought Control. That was a very interesting piece, and that's something that Major Cummings stumbles across, and then he realizes that this professor has a lot more to do with what's actually going on in this little town.
Yeah.
And it's really fun when they actually get him in the big armchair, right? In the classic scene where he just starts spouting off with the monologue and his whole story of whatever. And you could just, I honestly picture this as like a novel, like, like a turn of the century, like 19th century.
It almost kind of like reads that way. Like if you were to just read the screenplay.
I wouldn't be surprised if this was a short story. I didn't actually look into that, but anyways. So he's essentially studying the psychic phenomena. He is convinced that he can use his brain to manifest thoughts and control thoughts in a physical way. And the main way he's trying to do this is by turning a page in a book. And his breakthrough comes one day, because he's all hooked up to his, his equipment, whether it's just to monitor or to enhance. I'm not quite sure what it's doing, but, it's pretty technical looking.
It's very sci-fi.
Yeah, it's very sci-fi, very advanced, and he's doing it all on his own, right? He's no assistant, no nothing. No. Which is kind of interesting.
Because he's doing it secretly, because he's not really sure. It's almost like, and his expressions on his face the whole time, it's like he's really wanting to achieve. It's almost like a Frankenstein type of deal.
Oh,
it's like he's
definitely.
not even sure what he's trying to what
he's trying to
what the end
accomplish.
result is going to be. But the look on his face, he's like, I have to do this anyway.
And so then his breakthrough comes one day when he is in the middle of his experiments, and you get the lightning storm and the lightning strike. And that increased power allows him to flip the page. And so from there, obviously, he runs rampant, running wild with his thoughts, literally. We're not quite yet.
Pun intended.
And then that's where, like he already alluded to, he starts stealing power from the nearby nuclear facility owned by the Americans.
Yeah.
And then, lo and behold, of course, you get the classic narrative where his experiments run wild, escape beyond his control, as hard as he might try, destroy everything, right? So he has no record of how he created these things, how he accomplished it, and his equipment is destroyed too.
And that right there is very strange. Like that is a topic of conversation for this, because basically he describes that like he's like, I succeeded in my project, right? I succeeded in creating a life form. But he's not sure that they're dangerous at this point in time. He basically says that they slowly gained more intelligence and more individual capabilities. And
he could sense them, but he couldn't see them.
And then there's this classic, he comes in, things are destroyed. But why? Like the level of intelligence for them to not want to be like known or something,
or
right?
Controlled by him?
Or something like that. The fear of him being able to figure it out. But to go that far.
Or is it simple survival where they need more power, so they escape in order to find it?
But why the notes? Like, why destroy everything?
That speaks to more of a sentient organism, right? That doesn't want
to be known, to be discovered, or to be messed with or something.
Exactly. And that's their main strength, right? Is invisibility.
Pretty much.
On the societal scale and the physical scale, too.
They're clearly extremely powerful, too. Because these things are not that big, but they, like, overpower everything.
They just jump. They have one leap and then they're on you. It's like it's like something on a blanket. But yeah, they're very, very effective while they are invisible. As soon as they turn visible, their vulnerability increases exponentially.
Yeah.
That is their main downfall, which is kind of ironic, right? Because it is almost a parallel narrative, right, to what's happening with the nuclear base and with the increasing power and how they become more vulnerable as a result. Same thing with these creatures, right?
Exactly.
They're getting more and more power, and then as a result, they're more fallible.
And the professor has been essentially in denial about this entire time. He heard about the deaths on from the military base. He didn't want to think that it was the fiends. But then he has the classic line, I realized then I had created a fiend. It's just so perfect.
Yeah. Mad science, eh?
But the main military commanders at this point still don't believe in any of this. And it's not till the very end of his long monologue where there's multiple other sort of like, martial police or whoever there. And one of them by the door gets, the glass is shattered and snatched through. And then, and then one of the, the generals who's standing there who's just like, this man's insane. He's got to be committed. He's kind of just standing there left like, well,
maybe
guess not. All right. Well, I suppose we need to kill these things now. And from that point on, this movie gets pretty gory for the times.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not by our standards by any means, but for the times.
It's lots of like ketchup oozing out of brain like things.
Yeah. Yeah, and they realize that it's the nuclear facility, right? Like you just said, like the professor makes that statement. Major Cummings realizes they need to shut this all down. At this whole time, these fiends have just been using the power and then sucking brains out of the back of people's heads. Just to clarify that for everybody here, if you haven't actually watched the movie. So this is just fantastic. It was really controversial. If you can't gauge that, by the way, I just said that last sentence there of sucking brains out of the back of heads. But it wasn't even so much that. Like, that was definitely seen as being violent, but there was other things about it too. This wasn't the first release. This wasn't the premiere, but this was an interesting little bit I pulled from this website, Den of Geek. They cover a whole bunch of movies and cool stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And summer of 1958, I don't know in what order this was the release. The first premiere was in London because this was actually a British production, believe it or not. The original screenplay.
Really?
Yeah, a lot of Americans involved, but it was...
that makes sense because actually, this is random trivia, but a lot of the military personnel were actually British. And in one of the scenes, one of them salutes Major Cummings in the British salute, which was wrong because it's a military base, and then Major Cummings returns the salute with the proper American salute. It's the difference between having your hand like tilted in or tilted out. Yeah.
Oh, okay, interesting. A little bit of trivia there. So yeah, this was sometime in the summer of the year it was released in 58, and there was apparently like a lot of crowds in New York, and there was this display of the creature. Essentially,
right,
which is kind of interesting because it's giving it away, right? But at the same time, it's the 50s, so this is obviously going to reel people in. And this was outside of, how do you pronounce this? The Rialto Theater in Times Square. So glass case containing the creature that in the article here, the author says essentially, very much like they do in the movie, a cross between a gastropod with a series of internal organs awkwardly stitched together. Its head essentially a gray wobbling human brain. This version had eyes on stalks, which is interesting, just as a snail's would. I didn't really notice that in them.
There was a few moments where I kind of noticed things like that, like appendages.
It was it's stop motion animation, right? So it was kind of like hard to gauge those kinds of things. And then, of course, the body resembling a spinal column, which was found removed from all the victims in the film. And people were pretty like gawking at this. Apparently there was even sound effects for this too. So it had the classic like,
Ew.
which was this very cheesy sound effect that's become so iconic in especially 50s sci-fi lore, but just in sci-fi lore in general. And
in the intro, or not the intro, but the menu for the movie.
The menu. It's awesome. Apparently this really affected, like, according to this article, traffic. Like, this was like a big issue and just kind of added to the already, like, well, a lot of people didn't like this movie, wanted it banned, thought it was in poor taste.
Oh, super controversial. And yeah, people were, because it was almost like going to, not like the circus, but when you have like those traveling shows, these exhibits, something like that, right? Where it's just like, it's outrageous. It's outrageous. It's upsetting. It's exciting. It's all of the above.
This is an actual quote here I've pulled from that same article. And this was the actual premiere. So following the movie's British premiere at the Ritz Theatre in London, the response was furious. Even with its X rating, film critics wondered aloud how this extraordinarily bloody film managed to get past the censors. It's even said that The Fiend Without A Face was discussed in British Parliament, where ministers also asked exactly how this came to be, who gave it its certification.
Really?
Apparently, according to this article, written by Ryan Lambie from denofgeek.com.
Oh my goodness.
Interesting, right? So
That's
this was literally
funny.
discussed in Parliament. And if you watch it nowadays, it's like, holy sweet and sour.
I wonder what the original production house was, eh?
Yeah, we could definitely pull that up.
I should.
Anyway, in all the effects, so it was all done by this German guy, Karl Ludwig Ruppel. And like I said, stop motion fiends, the stop motion animation. But yeah, like we said, throughout this entire thing, you don't see them. You see people getting strangled. There's even, a fight scene if you're considering that violence with Major Cummings and the confrontation with the dude in the living room. But there's no straight up fiend violence until this massive breakout of like blood and gore at the end of the movie, which is fantastic.
Where they're all kind of situated in the professor's living room. The professor, he tries to go out, right? He's like, maybe I can control him. And then he ends up just getting like piled on top of it. It's like a Monday Night Football game.
Yeah, and that's the question. It's like maybe he would have been able to control them if he had the opportunity to at an earlier stage of their development.
But they've gone
loose. They've gotten loose.
Well, they're beyond his capacity. Like, he doesn't actually have any like telepathic communication with them, right? Like, they're spawned and they're their own things now. These weird amorphous amphibian-like brains.
And I'm just trying to like picture in my mind how the creation of them would look in like physically. Like if you were to see it visually from the mental energy being manifested into these monsters.
Well, to me, I think it was really smart the way they started off, like just plot-wise, how the monsters started off invisible, as if that was like, it's a generation, right? It's an evolution of their nature and their physical form.
Right.
They've gone from psychic to physical.
Indeed. And now that they can see them, everybody starts busting out the guns because they're like, great, at least these things die. That was one of the lines from Major Cummings. And of course, they're all holed into the professor's office, boarded up the windows. The one guy, Melville is the name, is just freaking out. He's one of the locals or something like that, right? And everyone else is just open firing, and it's blood and ooze coming out of these things. They essentially like explode. They make this very interesting sci-fi sound.
It's like a ketchup-y sound.
Ooze, ketchup-y? Sure, let's go with that. Essentially, very, very, very gory for the time, which is hard to believe.
It is kind of hard to believe. It's nowhere even near even like the gore we see from like the 70s and 80s.
Oh, God. Yeah.
But you would imagine it would be very shocking to see something like that.
Yeah.
Like something so alien looking too, right? These things are pretty imaginative if you think, well, imaginative. It is just a brain, I guess, with a tail attached to it.
I wish this movie was in color, though. Like, it's kind of fun that it's in black and white, but there was the possibility of it being in color at that point in time.
Okay, I guess so, yeah, if it was 19,
Because we've watched some 50s movies. What was, even 20,000 Leagues? Wasn't that 50-something, even slightly earlier?
56, 54 maybe?
I thought it was slightly earlier, and of course that was color. But that I feel like Walt Disney had some proprietary things going on there for his film production.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
But like, okay, let's break down a little bit more of the actual fiends itself. The physical manifestations from thought. So the power of the mind, accessing energy beyond any known science, I guess, is how we can try to rationalize this, to the point of forming matter into a literal physical form that then takes on an entire life of its own. This is so beyond Frankenstein, like taking body parts and stitching it together and having the lightning, even though we literally have that. The lightning.
We do, yeah.
Very Frankenstein-esque. Harkening
The
back
source
to
of
that.
life. Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
I like the jump between the psychic to the physical. Like, you're going from an amaterial to a material form.
Do you believe it to be possible?
Well, but that's just it, though. It's like, we can get in all sorts of like, can you spawn life in, say, another dimension other than your own? Can that then cross over, right? Like, what is consciousness? Can we project consciousness?
Ooh, that's actually maybe an interesting theory for this. Is like maybe the professor, and of course we're just making this all up, but it's like maybe he did just open a portal. He didn't actually create these things at all. He thinks he did, and he just accessed something that he shouldn't have. But with the process of using energy from his mind.
Well, with the added complication of having a nuclear like having that right in your backyard.
Of course.
Almost like a Stranger Things, right?
Yeah. Because then these things just multiply like amoeba, essentially.
Yeah, that's the weird part.
Boom, boom. They have no reproduction. They're not mating and reproducing. They're just multiplying.
Is the fact that the professor exists spawning even more of them? Is it just the simple fact that there's nuclear... I
guess that's it, the nuclear power.
Exactly, and hybridization and like mutations of these things.
Yeah.
We never actually see that, though. We never see any babies. We never see any spawning.
We just see them grow. Like we see them get a little bit bigger. And then that's the other thing that's interesting here that I made a note of that I wanted to ask you, because they become visible as they become stronger. So,
which is a weakening factor.
That's
where it's for me. It comes into this whole like not double entendre, but like what am I trying to say? Like the parallel right between the humans and their increasing capability, increasing technology, how that eventually hinders them in the end.
Right.
Same thing with these creatures, right?
Yeah.
They're getting stronger, but they're also getting weaker.
But they're eating and sucking brains and things like that. I suppose that you can make the argument that's why they become visible. They need the physical matter that we can see to exist. So eventually they will become visible because that's what they keep consuming.
Perhaps, but it seemed more obvious that it was the increasing nuclear, when they start adding more to the generators, that's when they become visible.
Right. They obviously are in a, yeah. It's just so odd though. It's like, because there's no byproduct of them eating these brains or anything.
I know, right? They just maintain. And that was kind of another question I had. So it's like, okay, clearly the nuclear technology and the nuclear material is their main source of power. Why are they so nefarious? Like, why are they going out and attacking these people? Is it like a two-pronged thing where they need sustenance in the form of like brains and or because like for me it would seem more plausible if they were just like these like literally nuclear power hungry organisms that they would go straight to that and they would defend that, right? So if say the humans tried to intervene, that's when they become victims. It seems more random than that though, right? Because the first victims are just out in the middle of the woods. The second victims are just two farmers going about their day, so it seems like they're kind of more nefarious, more hunters or predators to a certain degree.
Very much like the creatures in Alien. They are fiends. The fiends is the perfect name for it. It's bizarre. They don't really seem to have any no organization or anything. They just attack at random. It's very, very odd.
As if they're punishing the victims or they're punishing the locals and the military.
What do you
Everyone.
think? Yeah, like is there
a moral lesson to be learned here?
Well, that was the question I was just going to ask you too. Well, sort of in a way. There's obviously a very kind of a harsh message in terms of nuclear power here. Mm-hmm. Do you think that was just a kind of a byproduct of this, or is that like some people pulling the string? Like we didn't really dig too far into that specifically. But it definitely sounds like someone who was involved in this film production was just like dead set against nuclear power.
Definitely is a political statement against that. Or just like almost like an Aesop's fable, right? Where it's like a moral...
Be weary of what can...
A cautionary tale.
A cautionary tale. Yeah. You can spawn evil fiends. Nobody wants that.
Nobody.
It's less than ideal in all circumstances. Well... Do you have anything else we want to do?
Or maybe it's a lesson to not spy on your Russian enemies.
This was actually a Russian-produced film trying to scare people into believing fiends exist. So, not true. False.
They came from Russia.
Honestly, my favorite scene is definitely the end when there's the barrage of the fiends and they have that final shootout and the Melville guy gets wrapped up and he's killed instantly. Like that's the other interesting thing too. It's like the brain sucking thing is quick. It goes. Mm-hmm. They obviously have some sort of proboscis.
Yeah.
They're very much like chupacabras. They're brains chupacabras.
Kind of. Well, what happened to the guy that ends up interrupting them, right? Remember they're in the middle of like trying to placate the locals and the mayor and all this stuff. And they're like, it's not the guy that's running amok. And then they hear the moaning and he's like just kind of barges in the middle of their meeting.
Oh yeah, he survived.
He's that guy and he survived.
But part of his brain was missing.
Exactly. So he's almost just been like turned to mush. Like,
he had been lobotomized. They didn't have time to suck out all his juices, I suppose.
Freaky, man.
Awesome movie. Like one of my favorite sci-fi movies. I absolutely love it. So
it's great.
I know some of you guys listen to.
And it's to the point. It's a nice succinct plot.
It's actually a pretty short film.
It is.
I feel like it's under an hour. Mm-hmm. It's like 50 something minutes.
It is. It's close to an hour, just over, just under.
Okay.
You get a nice little romance aspect to it as well.
And the towel clad.
Yep.
Another obviously controversial part of the film, the gore, and then that, which were the parts of it that made it the classic B sci-fi.
If they didn't have that, it would have been instantly forgotten.
And it's become a Criterion classic, which is amazing. So, I think that kind of brings us to the end of this Film Friday. Thank you guys so much for listening. And as always, this is a listener-suggested aspect of the show. So we definitely have a few that we love, including this one, Fiend Without A Face. But we really want to hear what you guys have to say. So let us know your suggestions. Hit us up on social media. You know where to find us at Into the Portal Podcast. You can send us an email, into the portal mailbox at gmail.com. What else was I going to say there? Obviously, hit up our network. Check us out, straightupstrange.com.
We're actually in the middle of revamping our website. We're actually moving to a new home. So we're going to Shopify from Squarespace, which means, if anyone knows anything about Shopify, e-commerce giants. Indeed. So we're going to have a few really fun, just one-off items that we're going to be rolling out soon. So look forward to that.
It's going to be sweet.
And then, of course, next week, brand new episode. What are we talking about, Andrew?
Well, we are going to be getting into a few different aspects of strange cases of dogmen and dog-headed creatures throughout history. Bipedal, I should be specific, going all the way back into the ancient world, but also some modern cases of just pure strangeness here in North America. So that's what's coming at you guys next week.
I'm excited for that one. If anyone in and around that has listened to the show. Because like these encounters with dogmen are quite common apparently. And they're spread out all over, like the Michigan dogman, the
Beast of Bray.
The Beast of Bray Road. That's in
Wisconsin.
There's
a whole bunch. There's
West Virginia.
been even reports in Canada as well.
Yeah,
on the
all
East
over.
Coast.
Even
So,
in Alaska, I saw a few. So
very, very strange.
If anyone has any cool stories related to the dogman, let us know.
Definitely hit us up. As always, thank you to our Patreon producer, Jordan Yu, and to all of our Patreon supporters. Shout out this week to Aaron Bloom. He's been a longtime listener and supporter of the show. Just wanted to give him a little shout out. And same to Wesley Price over there in Australia. Those two guys, longtime listeners and supporters of us here at Into the Portal. So thank you guys. And thank you to all of you guys for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. And tell your friends about it if they like things that are strange as well.
The weird, the freaky, the strange, all that jazz.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us on Into the Portal.
Your gateway to the bizarre.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.
Each of us has a purpose. We are destined to do something meaningful, not only to support our loved ones, but to positively impact our communities throughout the country. What do you think a private Christian education looks like? Grand Canyon University offers over 175 high-quality online programs across 9 colleges. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Visit gcu.edu.